Flights are pricey, planning feels chaotic, and that trip that keeps getting pushed because you're too busy or travel's too expensive. Welcome to Points, Cards, and Travel. I'm Ross, the founder of Itinerary Boss. I've made the mistakes of doing this for 10 plus years so you don't have to. Each week, you'll get practical tools, point strategies, and expert guests with real use cases so you can travel better for way less using points and miles. Quick thing before we bring on our guest, if you're new here, go ahead and grab my free 5 step roadmap to your next free 5 star luxury vacation and the one card that gets you there, which you can find in the show notes. Now, let's bring on our guest and get into it. Hey, David. Thanks for joining Points, Cards, and Travel today. How you doing?
I'm great, Ross. And thanks for inviting me over. I love to do this kind of conversation.
Yeah, this is going to be fun, man. We're going to be talking all things business owners, some strategies that a lot of times people don't hear on social media because you lived it, right? You lived it. I know you now help people buy and sell businesses. Also, you worked at Amex. So those are some things that you have that, and this is over 20 plus years, maybe even more experience that you can share. So I'm really excited to get into the conversation.
Yeah, yeah. So, and just for everyone to kind of things kind of went off kilter there with the great financial crisis. A few years later, I went looking for something new. I got into business brokerage. Eventually, ended up starting a career with American Express before getting back into the world of helping people buy and sell businesses. And when I was with Amex, I was with their corporate card division here where I live in Canada. And so they actually trained me on some of the points lifestyle stuff that you talk about on your show.
Yeah, no, this is going to be exciting because yeah, you have that training. You also, if you're listening from Canada or you're listening internationally, here's some tips because David knows it, right? There's sometimes different rules. So we're really excited to get into it. I know I got the chance to come on your show, do a live stream, help some of your audience. So I appreciate you coming on and just returning the favor. But let's go ahead and dive in. I mean, when you were working at Amex and even just now, I mean, you're helping people, right, buy and sell small businesses. So you're in it daily. What are some of the things that, they are mistakes they're making about credit cards and points?
Yeah, I think the number one biggest mistake that small business owners make about credit cards and points is that they're bringing their consumer attitude and understanding about points cards into their small business. And so they're thinking way too small about it. And sometimes if you start a business, oftentimes you have to use your personal credit cards to make some business purchases and things like that. And people will kind of smile in the knowledge that they're collecting some points and things. But when they start to get rolling, there's all kinds of people out there that talk about different kinds of credit and business credit versus personal credit and stuff. But what I find is that people never really stop and say, hey, wait a minute, I should think about a strategy about how I want to maximize this. And they'll keep using maybe the card that they used as a consumer, and they'll start to hit limits and things that they don't even know exist if they put enough spending through it. And sometimes without putting some planning in place, you can end up accumulating a whole ton of points for something that may not really hold a lot of value for you when you could have been using that spend towards something that was more worthwhile. I always like to point out to people that these points are a form of currency, but they're like impaired currency. They're not as flexible as dollars, where you can use a dollar for anything. Like depending on what program this point is with, obviously it's going to be better for some things or others. And by having an understanding of what you want out of the program, then you can get a lot more out of it in creating a plan.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what I see. I think it's people start and they get comfortable, and that's totally fine, right? You're running a business, so a lot of the times it isn't, hey, let me go figure out which credit card is going to get me the most points, then take my family on travel. Like that's the afterthought is usually it's how do I make more revenue? How do I grow the business? How do I make sure cash flow is coming in? And this is a lever that a lot of people don't realize that you can use to then pay for that, right? And there's some other strategies we're going to get into, but yeah, that's probably a big mistake that I see is, or hey, I've banked with this bank forever, and this banker told me to get this card, and then sometimes it's a cash back or it's one that you can't, right? You only can use through that bank's portal where you're capped. So that's a big mistake I see. And from your Amex experience, I mean, what do you feel like before going into that, right? Like you went in there and then after you worked there, like how did that help you kind of change your mind on how the reward system actually works?
Well, one of the first things that I think people should consider when they're in a small business is they should consider the time value of money. So when I would sit down with a prospective customer in my Amex days, we would look at what they were spending money on because I wanted to see if I could identify suppliers they were using that we could put on their Amex card, right? And so I would talk with them about their cost of capital or what their expected rate of return was in the money that they had in their business. And a lot of small business people never think about these things. These are finance concepts, and people only really think about the money in their business when they run out of it and they're kind of scrambling around. And so I would say to people like, if I can show you how I can take $20,000 a month worth of spending that you're doing by check or bank payment and delay it by 30 days, what that will mean is in this coming month, there's going to be $30,000 that will no longer leave your business for 1 month. And at the end of that month, if you put these purchases onto the Amex card, then you're going to have to pay the Amex card. But in this one moment of adjustment, we're going to be changing the flow of cash in your business. And what it's going to do is free up this $30,000 in this one instance of changing the way you do things. But that's like finding $30,000 to invest in your business for other purposes, and it's not going to cost you anything, right? There is a cost associated with it. It's going to cost your suppliers through the merchant discount fees, but if we pick the right suppliers, they're not going to charge you anymore. And we can talk about merchant discount fees later, but I would show people how I could help delay the money that was leaving their business anyway and have a net effective increase in their operating capital. So that'd be number one. And then we would usually get into the conversation about the points and what the points are worth. And, you know, back in those days, I was primarily pushing the membership reward based cards that we had. And you could move those points into Air Canada's Aeroplan program here at the time. And we had these fixed redemption amounts. So if you wanted like a business class ticket, it was 50,000 points. And so it was really easy then to calculate, here is the value if you wanted to use these points to fly, to Europe or something like that, or these are the points if you want to fly to California, and give them sort of a an understanding of what they were missing out on as far as value if they wanted to travel. Because as you know, depends on what you want to redeem these things for. That value can vary widely.
If this episode is helping you out, could you hit that follow or subscribe button and also leave a quick 5-star rating wherever you're listening? Yeah, no, it's a great way to think about it. I want to dive into like getting more into the $30,000, the cash flow, like how all that works. But I think just one thing that you called out is the value around it. A lot of times people may not want to travel, but it may just be that they think it's too expensive or they don't have the cash to do it. And I think this unlocks a lot of opportunity that a lot of people aren't thinking about. So that's one thing just for people who are listening. If you're like, oh, travel, because I hear this all the time, travel's expensive. I don't have the money, right? Points, my points aren't worth anything, right? I redeemed them for statement credits, gift cards, cash back, Amazon, right? All the ways that get poor redemptions. Like though that's where when David's talking about, I like that you brought up the transfer partner, just Air Canada, because it's super simple. That's where the
Mm,
value really comes from. But for people who are just coming in and starting to conceptualize this, like when you say $30,000 and how does that, you mentioned $20,000, then $30,000 and like that 30-day mark, like, can you kind of walk me through and our
sure.
listeners just how that even comes to play?
So this is when you're looking at a credit card program for business. This is why the billing cycle is so important. And this was one of the big competitive advantages that we had at Amex over other bank issued cards. This is why we would bring this up because our cards would have a 30-day payment cycle. So you'd get an invoice on the first and you would have until the end of the month, for example, to pay it, so a full 30 days versus most of the bank cards were only giving like 16 or 21 days to pay the statement. And so if you can conceptualize that, what that means is you buy something through the month of February, let's say, and then you got to pay it on March 21st. Well, that means you're not even getting a full spending cycle before you have to pay the previous month's bill, right? But if you have a 30-day payment cycle, billing cycle, that means you get to spend all the money through March, and then you get the invoice, and then you get to wait until the very end of April before you have to pay it off. That extra few days that makes it a full billing cycle does a tremendous amount. I I remember there was a home builder, and he said, "Look," he said, I'm a private client, account with one of the big banks. They give me this point accelerator program with their with their Visa card. It's you can't show me a better deal." And I said, "Well, how about if I show you how I can give you an interest-free loan in your business for like 100 grand?" And he's like, "Okay, I'm listening." I'm like, "Okay, good." And I said, I'm pretty sure that I can get you approved for $100,000 limit on this card. And because it's an Amex card with the full 30-day billing cycle, it means on the very first day of your new billing cycle, you can call one of your suppliers. And this guy was doing millions of dollars of business a month. Okay. So it was a very good sized business. You can call one supplier and simply max out the card and say, put a $100,000 charge on this card. And then at the end of the month, you'll get your statement. Now, remember, the card's maxed out for the whole month. At the end of the month, you'll get your statement, and that's going to be due in 30 days. So it's still maxed out, right? So at the end of the next 30 days, he's now approaching the end of the second billing cycle. He then pays it in full, $100,000, and then immediately the next day calls a supplier and charges it right back up 100 grand. And so what I showed him how to do was basically by maxing out the card every second cycle, he basically was able to write himself 6 interest-free loans over the course of the year that were 0%. And it basically injected that operating capital into his business with no cost. Now he was building homes. And so that money was like valuable to him, like to have this excess liquidity that he could use in the business. And then the points were just kind of an added perk for him. And quite honestly, what I had to offer him was not as good as what his bank was offering him because he was in this special category of card that program that they had. But that is one of the things that you need to think about when you're in business is the operating float or cash flow value, et cetera. Um, because again, that money has a cost, but you're not paying it. It's the suppliers that are paying it through their merchant discounts.
Yeah, 100%. And that's no, I appreciate you sharing that. And you broke it down so simply because you did it every day. And I'm just thinking through the concept. We had a client where same thing, developer spending a ton and running into credit limit caps because they got a card that only had around 70K a month and they were doing, I mean, significant volume, like upwards of 400,000 a month, and they weren't able to get, right? They weren't putting everything on a card because one, that they had a limit, and two, they saw the fee so that the merchant charge sometimes just depends, right,
Mm.
on that person. The 3% or depending on, there's ways to get that fee lowered depending on volume with other, software. But I'm curious from your standpoint, like when someone comes in, because this is something I see all the time, first thing they see is 3%. And on 100 grand, right, they go, well, that's $3,000 through my, right? Like I'm gonna have to pay that. How would you walk
Yeah.
through that with them?
It all depends on what you're using the points for. So if you have $100,000 cost and they're going to charge you $103,000 if you want to use your charge card, then I would ask, what is the return on spend that you're going to spend the points on, right? Because what that extra $3,000 has done is it's reduced your net income by $3,000. Now, this is where knowing your numbers is really important because if you know what your marginal tax rate is, which is the amount of tax you pay on the next dollar you earn, which is going to vary wildly for people depending on the jurisdiction that they're in. So someone in California is going to have a much higher marginal tax rate if they're earning like a couple hundred grand or 150 grand than someone in Texas, for example, right? And so by understanding your marginal tax rate, if you are in a place where you could be paying like 48 or 50 cents on the dollar, well, if you earned that extra $3,000 in your business, it would cost you $1,500 in income tax, right? So if your business spends the $3,000, then you're saving $1,500 in income tax. So the value is not really $3,000 to you as a business owner. It's actually only half of that. it could be more of that if you're in a place like Texas, right? So this is where marginal tax rates are important. So now the question is, if you put that $103,000 charge on your card, how many points do you get and how much is it worth to redeem those points? So, I have an Aeroplan Amex card that earns 1.25 point for every dollar that I spend. So I would earn almost 130,000 points for putting that $103,000 charge on. With 130,000 points, I can fly first class round trip to Europe sometimes, right? And so like what would you rather have? 1,500 after tax dollars or that flight? And that's what it comes down to. And understanding what you're going to do with the points is so critical in figuring out whether it makes sense or not to bear the additional cost when it comes to suppliers that are going to have that extra fee. And you know, there are some suppliers that have the extra fee. Other suppliers do not have the extra fee. Um, you know, one of the biggest opportunities I think for most businesses for not paying a fee is in all of the overhead stuff. So like cell phones, your internet plan, like renting cars, like all that kind of stuff. People just take credit cards. But to really get volume, you need to get into the cost of goods sold, like the inputs of your business. So for the home builder, for example, paying for the building supplies, that kind of stuff, and then you really start to pile up these points fast.
100%. Yeah. And the materials and labor piece, like that was where talking to developers, real estate investors, like that's how, that was the pain that I felt for years. And why I started talking about this so in depth was, and we were doing it at such a small scale where it was like, this painter won't take card 5 grand, right? This HOA roofing won't take card 10 grand, right? We just did a light rehab 20 grand. And after like the third one, I'm like, people have to be doing this at like 10, 20 times scale, even more, right? And that's when I figured out that problem and started to be like, oh, well, we can do this with this business card that earns us a welcome bonus that pays for that, right? First class, business class seat that, is worth, like you mentioned, the Air Canada over to Europe. I mean, depending on what flight that is, that's five, $10,000, maybe more sometimes round trip. So
Mm.
that's where knowing that we wanted to thank you for listening in and mention if you want help applying this to your own spending and trip planning strategy, that's exactly what the Reward Strategy Lab community is for. You can find details if you want to join within our show notes. Now, back on with the show. And knowing, like, yes, if you're going to go get those and then redeem them towards gift cards or Amazon or statement credits, like you're getting zero point 0.6, zero point 0.7, one, one on the dollar. So that is sometimes the challenge and the mistake where before running through this math and just knowing those different strategies that you just mentioned, that's why people stop and they don't even look into it. But when you peel back the curtain and you go through that strategy, and business owners at the end of the day want to figure out how do they save on taxes, save money, and have more cash flow. And then the cherry on top, right, is hey, I really want to travel. My spouse has been nagging me to plan this trip, but it's too expensive. That's then the solution of, oh, wait, I can do this using points. And I love that you know that because you did that for so long. And I'm sure you've seen like the light bulb go, oh, crap, I need to do this now.
I remember one client that I had, and I signed him up, with a platinum card, which had their best earn rate at the time. And he and his wife went from never traveling to going somewhere every month.
I love it.
Like every month they were going for like a 3 night getaway, and they were covering the flight and the hotel with points. And so that leads me to something else that I like to think about. Like for myself personally, I have my business. So and my business has, like the regular spending a lot of small businesses would have. It's somewhere between $5,000 and $9,000 usually every month. And that goes onto a business corporate card that earns me Aeroplan points. And then for my personal spending, here's the big thing where people really have to think about this is, do you want to have one big bucket, right? Because sometimes you can have more than one card from more than one issuer that contribute to the same pail. And so, for example, here in Canada, there are Amex cards for Aeroplan with Air Canada, and then there are also TD Bank credit cards with Air Canada. And some people who are grandfathered in can actually get CIBC credit cards with Air Canada. And so you can actually have personal and business cards all contributing to the same pool of points, right? Which can create more flexibility, but depending on what you want to use them for, it may not be overall the best benefit, because here's sort of the second order mind game I think you have to play here in your consideration. Many of the places where you use the points, so the airlines, the hotel chains, et cetera, have their own system of status tiers, right? And so as you move up those status tiers, you get other additional perks, benefits, et cetera. And often those status tiers are easier to achieve when you hold the credit card. So 2 years ago, I did a complete analysis of my own spending. And what I decided to do is I decided to use the Aeroplan card for all my business spending to earn Aeroplan points for flights. But then my personal spending, I got the Amex Bonvoy, Marriott Bonvoy card. And so I find that the two of them work really well together, because the Bonvoy card gives me a boost in Marriott's, sort of status tier system. And then I've got the flights with the Amex, the Aeroplan Amex card. And so I find that I'm traveling, I'm using the points from Air Canada to fly. I'm staying in the Marriott hotels, whether I have to pay for them or not. I get all of these super acceleration bonuses, et cetera, because I hold that card. And like I'm going to go to a concert out in Victoria, BC at the end of May. My buddy lives out there. So I'm flying out there on points, but not only am I flying on points, I got a special priority reward from Air Canada because the amount of points I earn and the amount of flying I do. So it's actually a coupon for 50% off the Aeroplan point redemption. So I'm flying out there, and I live near the Atlantic Ocean on the east coast of Canada. So I'm flying completely across the country, and the taxes and fees are $108, and my points is 24,000 points I'm redeeming there. So that's literally like 2 months worth of my point accumulation in my business. And while we're there, we're going to a concert in Victoria. We're going to spend a night in a hotel there. And I got a night at a Marriott hotel, which is normally $340. We got it for 34,000 points, which means that the points are worth a penny a piece. But my Bonvoy Amex earns at 2 points per dollar earn rate, which means my return on spend is like 2%. So it's, you know, and because I'm a platinum member with Bonvoy, in part because I hold the credit card, we can do a late checkout till 4 p.m. if we want. We're going to get free breakfast. Like there's all those added perks just get piled on all the time because you're playing both the status game and the point game, and it's all fueled by the cards that you hold.
Yeah, no, 100%. And you have a good like you can say your strategy so clearly. I think and like this serves this purpose, this serves that purpose. And a lot of the times the first question, well, what's the best credit card? And it's like, well, how much time you have one, but then two, like for someone who's 23 and someone who's 35 who doesn't have a family versus someone who's 40 who has kids, like your expenses and lifestyle are going to be completely different. So you have to kind of
Mm.
think through where are those expenses coming from on the personal side. What do you actually, if you like to just travel domestically, like if you have travel sports for kids, like your strategy is going to be completely different than someone who's like, hey, I want to go over to Europe. I want to go to Asia. Like I want to go in these places and fly luxury business class. Like that's it all comes into that strategy, but you hit it perfectly. It's like the stock market, like real estate, right? You need to be diversified so you aren't just putting all your eggs in one basket because and Canada's a little bit different than the US, but a lot of the times it's, hey, I use my platinum on every single expense, like when I'm going out to eat, and you get 1x the point. You could also get a different, right? You could also get a different Amex card or a Chase, Capital One, just kind of depends on where you're at. And you could start to earn, right, two, three, 4x on those specific things that then can use for domestic, for international. So it is key to know, like you said, it's figuring out what does that look like. And if you're a business traveler too, it's like you said, Marriott, Air Canada, that's where you're going to travel and you're also going to leverage that personally. We have a guy who wants to get Executive Platinum Pro on Amex or American out of Charlotte, spends a ton on that. He also flies a lot. So it's like spend up to that threshold, or if you're flying that much, put this much on and then move that other to a business card that earns you 2x on capped because you're a big spender. Like, and then you have those to go to Thailand, you know, Costa Rica, like places that you want to go. So it all comes down to, right, aligning it with the business and the personal spend.
This is great. Let's touch on the hotel stays there a little bit. You mentioned travel sports teams. So my son plays travel baseball, and so I have conversations often about points and cards and stuff with the other families. And the Marriott card works well for me because so much of my travel is determined and driven by me. So I'm going someplace, I'm choosing the hotel. I can always just pick the Marriott hotel. But if you are a person who literally stays at home all the time, but your kid is in travel sports, and in travel sports, often the hotel is being dictated by the team because all the kids want to stay together, right? And maybe the hotel is the one that just happens to be closest to the fields or the rink or whatever it is. And so for that person, I would say since you're not the one picking the properties, it actually likely would not make sense to go with something like that Marriott credit card. What I would look for instead would be a more open ended program like Amex membership rewards, but look for a card that has a higher earn rate on hotel stays so that it doesn't matter where you stay, you're earning a higher rate of points when you do charge it at any hotel property. And so this is like thinking about where the category spends are going to give you bonuses, how it fits into your personal and business spending, like you were saying, Ross. But also a little bit of like vision boarding, right?
Mhm.
I always challenge people: describe your perfect life a year from now or 5 years from now. Like, what does it look like? Where are you going? What are you doing? Uh, because if that's what you want your life to look at, like, well, then you figure out, well, what kind of points would I most be able to use to obtain that lifestyle? And that also can dictate which cards you're going to get.
Yeah, no, it's great. Great points. And if you want next level strategies, if you stay at home, you always can just book. You can take it on and you can book everyone's hotels for them, and then just get the cards, get the points. There's actually a guy who came on our podcast who he literally someone retired at they did like his high school band, and he said, "Hey, would you mind if I just like took over this and I'll just book everyone's flights, I'll book everyone's hotels." And he's like, he gets a new card for each year and then gets like those are some next level strategies, but it's a way to earn. And then no one likes booking hotels, no one likes booking that. So if you take it on, like you're getting paid. Yes, you're not getting paid, but you're getting paid in points that then for him, he's like, cool, now I can take my family wherever I want to go just because I spent, I know we go to the same place every year for travel sports or travel for debate teams, all that. So if you're looking for a fun way, a new hobby at home, there there's a little
One of
shiny
one of
object
my
idea.
one of my clients back in my Amex days was a travel agency that had like a main street retail walk-in, and they had developed a niche of catering to people that didn't have credit cards. So if somebody wanted to book a flight and only had cash, they would walk into the store and you know, lay out the money, and then they would buy the flight with a card I had issued to them. So that
Dang.
the owner of that agency was earning tons of points through doing just that kind of thing.
Maybe that's what I'll do when we expand Itinerary Boss, so you can just rack up points because our spend our spend is right. Our spend is in that like 5K or below on the business side, and so it's not like but we spend a ton, but it's yeah, the knowing how to optimize, is very key. What about so you've worked with a lot of business owners, we talked about just not looking at it holistically, but are there other mistakes that you saw? Are there like hesitation
The
sometimes?
number one mistake I've seen people make is confusing points with return on spend. So some cards will give you, like I mentioned, my Bonvoy card gives me 2 points for every dollar I spend, but the redemption rate is really good. There are other cards in the market that give you 2, 4, 5 points for every dollar you spend, but then when you convert it into what you can redeem for, the return on spend is no different than a card that gives you 1 point. And so you realize that there are card issuing companies that just play the game of how many points we give you. And there are people that fall for it. They just think, well, I get more points with this card, so it must be better, without following through to what is it I want to redeem for and what are those things worth. So it's figuring out the return on spend is the key.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I mean, now I get mailers every day and from card companies, and it's like, do you want this one? The probably biggest one I see is Delta Amex, where it's yes, you get that in, and you get that welcome bonus, but it could be 150K, and that gets you like one domestic flight because Delta charges out, just so much for any flight. So I think it's understanding too, like, sure, if you're in Atlanta or somewhere that's a Delta hub, that might be great. But if you're not a high spending business owner that's like, I'm going to spend 70K so I can hit my status, so I can get right the high status, and then I'm going to move everything over. If you're playing the game of, I just have daily, expenses and I'm spending 5 to 10K between business and personal, like that's probably not the best ball game to be in because they're charging. I mean, to fly, it's like 400,000 points for a one-way award ticket when you could go buy 4 or 5 sometimes if you had different points, like you said on your Air Canada, if you had Amex, those other
Well,
ones.
but the usability factor is important too. Like you said, I know Delta's a huge airline for Atlanta. Like here where I live, my local airport is, yeah, I live in Moncton, New Brunswick. So my local airport is like Air Canada, Porter, and WestJet. But WestJet only has one flight out of here, and it's to Calgary. And in Canada, Costco only accepts MasterCard. So everyone who's got growing teenagers who likes to go to Costco, you have to have at least one MasterCard. So, I remember trying to figure out which MasterCard do I want to have. And I decided upon the WestJet MasterCard, knowing full well they only had one flight out of my city. And so I used that card for like 3 years, managed to accumulate enough points for like a free flight on WestJet out to Calgary. And then Porter came out with a MasterCard through Bank of Montreal. And then I've just recently gotten that one because there's at least a couple Porter flights out of here. But yeah, I mean, honestly, I would rather just use my Amex um, over at Costco, but they won't take it.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the frustrating thing. I I think that whenever a business is going to make a material purchase above a certain amount of money, business owners really have to pause and ask, how can I make this work? So, for example, I recently had to buy a new computer, and they had a really great computer at Costco I was considering, but online, they only take Visa and MasterCard. In the store, they only take MasterCard. And so I could not use my Amex. So I actually took a minute and I did a web search, and then I found out that Asus had its own online store here that I could use my Amex on. So that's how I bought it. But we were talking about like a $1,700 purchase, which doesn't sound like a whole lot, but like that's 15% of the points that I just used to do my trip to Nanaimo. Like
Yeah.
it's worthwhile to me to spend 5 minutes on Google to find that.
You're bringing up a great point. No, 100%. And I think it's just thinking through and also understanding the right tools to be able to do that because there's so many out there. But I think people sometimes don't know. Like, great example, similar to yours, we're going to South Africa in May, and I don't have a lot of clothes to go on a safari. Like my wardrobe, my closet just isn't, overflowing with that. So I got an
You're not going to
email.
wear that red shirt behind you on the wall there?
Yeah, no. A little bit too expensive to take. But yeah, I mean, I was looking online, I got an email that said, "Hey, Colombia is 18% cash back through Rakuten." Which for us, that's huge because you can earn Amex or you can earn Bilt points on Rakuten. So for me,
Hmm.
we have the Bilt card to earn points on our mortgage that just came out. So I look at it as I can earn 2x uncapped on Bilt. I go spend $500 on clothes, I'm earning ultimately 20% on that. So I'm going to earn 10,000 built points from a $500 purchase. And then I can use those on hotels, flights, whatever that may be. And for people who are like, okay, what is $10,000 or what does 10,000 points get me? When we go to South Africa in 2 months in Cape Town, we're staying at a Hyatt where it's 5,000 points a night. The room, and this is over there. It's not going to be the same in the US, but the room there is $800 a night for 5,000 points. Like that's the value that you can accumulate just by, like you said, taking an extra step and being like, sure, it might not sound like a lot, but once you know how to redeem and optimize, that's where then it is like, oh wait, I can save a lot. And that's on $500, not 500,000 like a lot of business owners are spending.
Yeah. Yeah. It totally adds up, and it totally makes sense for people to spend a little bit of time focusing on this. And, you know, my biggest advice to people is if you don't have a very big business, or you don't have a business period, and you're just talking about personal spending, really examine where you go and how you spend your money. Because I think the cards that give you the categories, like a lot of cards out there specify like grocery, fuel, travel as higher earned categories. Figure out which one is going to give you points in those places. And I don't know if you have many of these in the States, but here we have a couple of points programs that are kind of like open between retailers and credit cards. So one is called Scene, where there's grocery chains, gas chains that will issue Scene points just for making a purchase. But then you can also get a credit card part of that program too. So if you use that credit card at that merchant, you're like earning both ways.
Hmm.
And so for a long time, I used to collect air miles because my local grocery store was issuing them. The pharmacy I went to was issuing them, and Shell gas stations were issuing them. And I got an air miles credit card. So I was kind of like four different ways I was banging them into my account. And then they started to lose retailers. And I realized, hey, this isn't going to work out. And so one of the things that I often suggest to people is think about how you might get out of these programs. So one of the things you might want to look at is what sort of small but valuable things can you redeem for if you are stuck in a situation where you have just a couple thousand points and you don't want to continue with the program. Like, is there going to be a pathway to liquidate in some way? And usually this isn't the best redemption, but like usually you're talking about gift cards or something. But at the end of my air miles days, what I ended up doing was went on a trip to New York City a couple of years ago, and we broke up the trip with a stop, and I was just able to use those points almost perfectly for a night near Portland, Maine. And I was like, here I am. I'm out of the program. I'm not going to collect any more of these. But that's something to think about too.
Yeah. No, it's great. And a lot of people when they get in is do points expire? What happens if I get all these and I don't know how to use them? So it's always good, again, like you said, just road mapping it out. And I really love the example in a year, where do you want to be? Because that's really a lot of people think, okay, I'm going to wait till I travel or till I have this business that spends a lot or until this is open or until we move or until we have, right, our kid. And then, right, and the list goes on. But it's like if you plan ahead and you start to take baby steps, like that's where in a year you'll probably learn a little bit more. You'll have a points balance that'll allow you to do that. But yeah, no, I love how you walk through that. What about, is there one thing? I know you talked about the guy who would take a trip every month, which is awesome, right? That's kind of the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. But is there other things that just surprise you when business owners start to optimize with a credit card strategy that you've seen?
Well, I've just seen people get more creative. Like, I don't know if they still do it, but like Air Canada is part of Star Alliance, which United is a part of as well. And for a long time, they used to have these promos on round the world tickets where you could fly across the different Star Alliance partners, like to go all the way around the globe. And I printed something off the internet because I used to show it. I used to bring it in to kind of get people excited. I'm like, hey, you could look, with only this amount of spending, you could buy this round the world ticket. And then everyone would be like, "Oh, that's so cool," but hardly anyone would ever do it. But I remember I did have one client who was like, "Oh, I bought one of those round the gain or lose a day of your life." Like, isn't that how it works on the Dateline?
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. No, it's it's cool because there's always, not everyone's going to do that, but there's going to be an outlier that's going to be someone who, they're either stay-at-home dad, stay-at-home mom, and they're like, "Oh, I went down this rabbit hole and now I'm flipping gold from Costco or I'm buying and selling gift cards." Like I don't play in that arena. There's some people that I know in the space who like love it. I'm just like, I time, effort, money, like I'll figure out other ways to earn points. But yeah, there's so much wild stuff that you see and people do. Well, cool.
I think it's great. I think it's value just sitting there for you to pick up. And if there's any decent volume of dollars going through your hands at all, and for most people, even in their personal lives, there's a decent volume of dollars going through their hands, it's worthwhile to invest a little bit of time just to spend some time analyzing what you're doing and what your goals are, and then choose a strategy. Once you've picked the card, that's it. You're locked into your strategy. You know what card you want to use and why. Or if you have a multi-card strategy, you know which one are you using where. Like, I know some people will use one for groceries and gas and another one for everything else, just based on whatever the redemptions are. But once you've made the decision, then you just lock in and you go on cruise control for a year or two, and then you can stop and reassess.
Yeah, 100%. I guess for people who are looking to buy and sell, small businesses, that's what you specialize in now. Is there anything that you've taken from your Amex days, from everything you've learned over the years that you've now implemented and you make sure, right, when people go to think about like that they put into play and some strategies that they should be thinking about?
Well, you can't pay off a business acquisition loan with points, unfortunately. So you've got to remain focused on the dollars when it comes to doing any kind of business deal to buy a business. But I, business makes can be put on credit card. So there's a value there that probably is not coming through on the financials that the current owner is enjoying, and it may not be insignificant. Like it definitely could be a reason why you might want to buy this business. Um, the the whole thing, I know in the beginning of this conversation, I mentioned marginal tax rates. What I can tell you globally is that in places in the world where people don't pay a lot of income tax, these kinds of systems just don't exist. They exist in a big way in places where people pay more income tax because they're one of these things that kind of flies under the radar. Like, I don't know what the exact rules are. I think you're supposed to declare it on your own tax return when you redeem for a flight or something like that. But of course, like, do people really do that? Like, I don't think they really do, right? But it's one of the very few places where people can do a little bit of extra work and get a little bit of a perk in life just from changing the habits or the methods of payment or et cetera.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Well, cool, David. This was super helpful. I really appreciate you coming on and taking some time. Where can our listeners find you? What's the best way if people are looking to buy, sell small business, or just follow you since you're a wealth of knowledge when it comes to the credit card points game, business owner strategies, and for someone who's in Canada, I highly suggest you follow David because he's an expert in that arena, and I have only been to Whistler, so I am not an expert there other than the heli skiing and the on the mountain.
Yeah, yeah. If anyone's interested in small business stuff, just look up David Barnett Small Business on any platform, and I'll come right to the top. And a lot of our conversations actually are about stuff going on in the U.S. About 65% of my audience is American, so we talk about things that are very American as well, like SBA financing and stuff like that. But generally, we talk about stuff all around the world. In fact, so it turns out that the things that concern deal makers in one part of the world are the same things that concern deal makers everywhere.
Yeah. Great. Well, we will make sure to link that in the show notes for our listeners and really appreciate you coming on again. He's David Barnett. I'm Ross Alcorn. We will see you next week. Thanks everyone for tuning in. Really appreciate you tuning in today. Before you go, again, if you're new here, grab my free 5-step roadmap to your next free 5-star luxury vacation and the one card that gets you there in the show notes. The main takeaway from today is you don't need more time or money to travel better. You just need a simple plan and the right strategy in place. My final thought is travel is supposed to feel exciting, not overwhelming. Take one thing you learned today, apply it this week, and your next trip gets easier starting now. We'll see you next episode. Really appreciate you tuning in.